More with Nick Robinson and Anna Fox. Jane Steele has a summary of the news.
There are questions about whether the government's deal with France to send some migrants back across the Channel will be enough to deter people from making the journey. Opposition parties say returning a limited number of people in exchange for genuine asylum seekers entering the UK will not be effective. Sir Keir Starmer says the one-in, one-out pilot, which still needs to be approved by the EU, will help turn the tables on migrant crossings. President Trump says the United States will impose a 35% tariff on imports from Canada next month. He warned the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney against retaliating. Mr. Carney said his government would continue to defend Canadian workers and businesses. Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu has ended a visit to Washington without a deal for a ceasefire in Gaza. He said a permanent end to the war must involve the disarmament of Hamas. Mr. Netanyahu said if that couldn't be achieved through negotiations, Israel would achieve it by force. BBC News has learned that a surgeon banned from working for a private healthcare company is still operating in the NHS. Nuffield Health said that Mark Lamar had had his practicing privileges withdrawn following an investigation into concerns about his surgical complication rates. But he continues to work as a colorectal surgeon at the Royal Sussex County Hospital in Brighton, which has stood by him. Mr. Lamar didn't respond to a request for comment. The UK's largest airport, Heathrow, has signalled that it wants to increase the fees it charges airlines. In its long-term plan, it suggested putting up landing fees by an average percent. The owner of British Airways has called the proposed rise excessive, while Virgin Atlantic says it is consumers who ultimately pay the bill. The first hosepipe ban of the year is now in force, affecting Yorkshire water customers. Anyone breaking the rules could face a fine of up to £1,000.
Thank you very much. You need 27 minutes to 7. On the morning after the deal with France was done to allow the return of some migrants who make the crossing across the Channel, questions are being asked about how much of a difference it will actually make and what obstacles might still line its way. Let's join our political correspondent Helen Cass is in Westminster this morning. Let's begin with why ministers are excited about this, Helen, because they are. What is it they think will make the difference?
Well, it is a political win. This is the first time that France has agreed to take migrants back. It's certainly what the government hoped would come out at the end of this summit with President Macron. And it does suggest that there is evidence that they are forming a better working relationship with France than the previous government did on this issue. But ultimately, what they believe is that if they can prove that people are being returned to France, then that will act as a deterrent. Broadly speaking, I suppose the underlying thinking isn't all that different to some of the things that the Tories were thinking about. If you can make it so that making the attempt to cross shuts you out of the UK system indefinitely, then that acts as a deterrent. There does seem to be pretty broad agreement, though, this morning that the 50 a week that's being talked about for the pilot wouldn't be sufficient to be a deterrent if you've got 800 people arriving a week. So the question then becomes, if this does work, what is the number that you have to get to for it to become a deterrent, and how do you scale up?
And there are a number of blocks that might be erected before that expansion can happen.
So first off, it's got to go through the EU. Of course, this affects the EU's external borders, and we're told it has to go through legal scrutiny with the Commission and EU member states. Now, it's not entirely clear if that means that the EU could actually block it. I think that's the case, but it's not quite clear what powers they have over this. There's also, of course, the question of whether the government could face legal challenges, and while it's unlikely to face the sort of issues about whether or not France is a safe country that the Tories Rwanda plan did, there could still be potentially individual legal challenges. Now, I am told by a Home Office source that they have factored in people wanting to delay in court. And then, of course, there are the operational details. How does the government choose which 5,800 people making a crossing go back? And if it works, as I said, how do you then scale it up? Do they have the operational ability to that? I think the last thing that's going to be quite interesting to see, though, is also how this goes down with some of the Labour backbenchers. It is opening a safe and legal route for some migrants from France, which they've long called for, but are they going to see that particularly?
Helen Cass in Westminster, thank you.
How has that news of the US-France one-in, one-out migration deal been received across the Channel? Catherine Norris-Trent is a senior correspondent for France 24. Catherine, good morning.
Good morning.
What are the French media, people like you, saying and thinking about it?
There was a bit of shock actually among some people when
Yes, dismay, I would say, was the part of the reaction I saw. There's some people thinking that this is basically not good news for France. So it's very much in the headlines, and it is being seen as quite a big deal over here. People thinking that basically it's going to end up with more asylum seekers in France, and so some of the reactions on some quarters quite negative, especially in and around the Calais region. I spoke to a couple of people there I've met from my time reporting around Calais, around that coastline in northern France, and the people I managed to get hold of said that, well, they thought that it was not going to be good news for them, that they were going to become even more of a logjam of people not only coming there to try and to get across, but then those who'd been sent back somehow working their way back to the coast, and that it would just create more chaos around the coast town. The mayor of Calais, Natasha Bouchard, expressed her dismay, saying that she and fellow mayors along the coast hadn't been listened to by the French authorities going into these talks, and that they wanted to see more of an exclusion zone around the north of France to try and keep migrants looking to cross the channel away. And so, yeah, she and a couple of other people from that area worrying that this is going to make their zone even more kind of saturated with people wanting to cross the border and smugglers as well.
That's really interesting, Catherine, because the whole point of this, or the whole way that it's been sold, was that it was supposed to provide that one in, one out balance. So it was supposed to equalise out, but people don't think that will happen. They think that in the end the balance will be disproportionate towards France.
Well, there's a lot of questions about where these people will go.
You're in a 15-minute congestion caused by collisions on the M1.
Are they going to be putting
You're still on the fastest route.
France? Are they going to be sent back to other EU countries? People are imagining already the tension that could cause with other countries in Europe where the migrants first entered Spain, such as Italy, such as Italy, Spain or Greece. And so what kind of impact that could have perhaps on even France's relationships with other European countries. And then there's this suspicion, yes, that people are just going to eventually make their way back to the coast, to the border, because once they've made the perilous journey from their home countries, and this is something that I've heard from some of the charities looking after refugees and migrants in and around Calais, is that people have decided to make this perilous journey and they won't be put off by this piece of legislation.
I wonder as well, Catherine, this is supposed to be a pilot, it's supposed to be a trial, small numbers at the beginning. Is there any sense that France might look at it, and if the problems that you described do materialise, that they might then pull out and say, you know what, this isn't working for us after all, we've tried it and it's not good?
Yeah, I think that's definitely there. It's on this side of the channel a much harder sell, I would say, than in the UK. People basically say, well, what does France get out of this? So presumably, if this doesn't go well, that could very much be on the table. We know, the political situation over here is very delicate as well. Emmanuel Macron's party doesn't have a majority in Parliament, so that's been pretty tricky politics to work out getting a coalition in place, and so things are finely balanced. If it comes in for a lot of criticism, yeah, I think that some kind of review of it is a pilot project, could politically be on the table.
Catherine Norris-Trent, a senior correspondent for France 24. Thank you. We'll put some of those thoughts to the Home Secretary at 10:08.
It is now 22/7. The first hosepipe ban in the country comes into force today, affecting people not just in Yorkshire but also in Derbyshire and North Lincolnshire. It's for customers of Yorkshire Water that supplies water beyond the county boundaries. Paul Hudson is BBC Yorkshire's climate correspondent. Morning to you, Paul. How dry is it?
There's an object on road ahead.
Exceptionally dry. In fact, I've got Met Office figures in front of me. Go back to 1836, which is almost 200 years, and across Yorkshire, it's been the second dry spring on record. I mean, it's not just a Yorkshire issue. The Environment Agency pointed out across England, it's been the dry spring for 132 years. But here in Yorkshire, February was very dry, and June's been exceptionally dry too. So it has been an exceptional sequence of rainfall deficit.
And the result of this ban means that there will be customers all over your region unable to use their hose pipes. Will there be the odd situation, though, that there'll be some people, for customers of another neighbouring company, who will be able to use the hose pipes?
Well, that's right. I mean, certainly across the Yorkshire and Lincolnshire region, you look at North Lincolnshire, Anglia Water supplies parts of that part of Lincolnshire. Yorkshire Water supplies another. Yorkshire Water borders Severn Trent. Severn Trent made it clear actually in May that they thought it unlikely that they were going to restrict customers' use of water. So I imagine that there will be towns where some people can use their hose pipes and others can't. But it's a little, you can't just look at rainfall figures in isolation. If you look at the wider picture, critics will point out that, since 2000, the population of Yorkshire has risen by 500,000. So that's 500,000 more people using Yorkshire Water. And they've not built a new reservoir since 1983. So it's a little bit more complicated than just blaming rainfall patterns. The last reservoir in Grimouth Reservoir up in Grassington was 42 years ago, and critics point perhaps to a lack of investment in new reservoirs.
Paul Hudson, BBC Yorkshire climate correspondent, thank you for joining us.
I live in West Yorkshire, not far from Halifax, and there is a reservoir near us, and when it gets dry like it is now, the water level goes down so much that it reveals this Viking era Packhorse Bridge, which was submerged for decades, and it's really dry when it appears again, and you can walk across it.
And the fact you have a dirty car as well.
Yeah, that's always
so should we have a look at the front pages of the papers and what make it? Lots of headlines around the story that we were just talking about, migration, with papers that are, let's be honest, sceptics about this government being pretty rude about what was unveiled yesterday. Daily Mail's headline is "What a Joke." The Telegraph says Brexit lies to blame for crisis, quoting Emmanuel Macron. Their Europe bloc deal on boat migrants is the way that the Times puts it.
Another story that we're going to be talking about on the programme this morning, on the front of the Times this morning, crackdown to QUK of sick note epidemic. This is GPs being told to prescribe job coaches to people, or trips to the gym instead of just signing them off work. Also, we are going to talk later in the programme about the best trees in the UK. And if you want to prepare yourself for that, there are pictures of them on page 5 of the Eye this morning, including a cedar tree that the Beatles once climbed and sat in the branches. There's an oak tree that inspired Virginia Woolf. They are the finalists in the Tree of the Year competition. So before 9, we will discuss some of those as well.
Talking more about that. And Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, is making news on the front page of the Telegraph as well as the Times, because he is suggesting that one way to deal with the problem of doctors' pay, with new strikes coming from resident or junior doctors in a couple of weeks' time, is that they should cut their pensions, and that could be used in order to pay for a bigger pay rise.
It is just coming up to 7:15.
And Wes Streeting was making a statement in the Commons yesterday after the BMA announced that latest round of strikes. Reporting on yesterday in Parliament is our correspondent Alicia McCarthy.
Is work making you a little stressed? Blood pressure nudging upwards? Perhaps you've been to see a doctor but somehow come away with the feeling that you just haven't quite been listened to.
I offered to meet with the BMA's full resident doctors committee and to work with them to improve their members' working lives. I have offered repeatedly to meet the entire committee since the start of this year, but they still have not taken up my offer.
The Health Secretary was Streeting there. He said what used to be called junior doctors had received a near 29% increase in recent years, and while he was happy to have talks about conditions, he couldn't and wouldn't reopen this year's pay negotiations. And he urged them to call off planned strikes scheduled to begin on the 25th of July.
5 days of strike action means patients and their families receiving the phone call they are currently dreading of being told that the operation or appointment they've been waiting for, often for far too long, is being cancelled and delayed. I know how I'd feel if this happened to a member of my family currently waiting, and I asked them to consider how they would feel if it happened to a member of theirs.
The Shadow Health Secretary, the Conservative Edward Arger, had a mild outbreak of "I told you so."
Last year, we warned the government that caving into union demands for above-inflation pay rises without any conditions or strings attached would set a dangerous precedent. It would send a message that the government were weak, and we warned that the unions would simply come back for more.
He said the strikes were irresponsible, wrong and unnecessary, but
Labour's weakness is sadly fueling this crisis. If they don't get a grip now, a summer of discontent and strikes risks turning into a summer of chaos, and it will be patients that pay the price.
But the Health Secretary said things had been worse under the Conservatives, who'd let previous strikes run and run. And with a nod to the Tory front bench opposite, he added,
Sat in front of me is the ghost of Christmas past. Not in their place today in the Reform Party is the ghost of Christmas future. Perhaps the BMA might consider they're lucky to have the ghost of Christmas present in front of them.
For the Lib Dems, Alison Bennett said the British Medical Association was calling for another 29% rise.
That kind of increase doesn't feel affordable or realistic right now. That said, we cannot ignore the reality of working conditions in our NHS. Doctors are expected to save lives in collapsing wards and deliver care in corridors rather than in safe clinical settings. It's degrading and dangerous for both staff and patients.
The Commons' longest-serving MP, the Conservative Sir Edward Lee, said MPs across the Commons 100% supported what he called Wes Streeting's robust approach to the BMA.
Of course, we all love doctors, but the starting salary isn't so very bad. They do have a job for life, a very good job, which most people don't have. And perhaps he could also mention that they have a much better career structure than most people. A far higher proportion get the top job, namely a consultant. And the starting salary of a consultant at £110,000 a year is still a bad whack.
The Health Secretary reckoned comments like that showed that the BMA didn't have support on either side of the Commons. But he did accept that doctors' career prospects didn't look as rosy as they had done in the past.
We've got far too much doctor unemployment. We've got far too many specialty bottlenecks. We've got, I think, actually a really unreasonable set of behaviours towards resident doctors in terms of placements, rotations, being able to take time off work to attend things like weddings and important life moments. And that's the tragedy of the position we find ourselves in, is that I recognise that and I want to address it.
A Labour MP, Emma Foodie, thought there'd be a price to pay if the threatened strike action went ahead.
Can you guarantee the cost of these strikes won't lead to job cuts?
In all honesty, I'm afraid I can't give my honourable friend that assurance.
Wes Streeting said NHS finances were precariously balanced, and every penny spent on strike action was money that could have been spent driving improvements in the service.
That is Alicia McCarthy reporting. It is 12 minutes to 7. The Home Affairs Committee has warned that the government's pledge to halve violence against women and girls will be difficult to achieve because funding settlements are too short term and the approach to commissioning services is too fragmented. The chair of the committee, Dame Karen Bradley, said the processes were hard to navigate and time consuming, really far from ideal for complex and sensitive needs. Dame Nicole Jacobs is the Domestic Abuse Commissioner for England and Wales, joins us on the programme. Good morning.
Good morning, Anna.
These are some concerning issues that have been identified here, aren't they?
Concerning and absolutely true, I'm afraid. You know, it's very, very true that no government has ever put forward the necessary funding to tackle domestic abuse, but very true also that the way that government plans for these services is haphazard. It is not planned in a comprehensive way. These services have never sat in core budgets, and yet we know they're vital for tackling domestic abuse. They're vital for the day-to-day support and safety of victims.
The government has talked about its ambition, what it wants to try and do. There's a strategy coming. It was due to come this month actually, but it looks more likely to be September now. Are these things that they are likely to be taking into account?
Well, I hope so. As you said, I mean, much of the first year of this government, it's been business as usual in terms of the funding, and there's a real focus on this strategy, which, as you said, has been delayed from, we were expecting it in July, we're now expecting it in September, and it is meant to be reflecting the mission of the government, the mission-driven approach to tackling violence against women and girls. Obviously, domestic abuse is really central to that, and yet we still don't know exactly what the commitments are across departments. And of course, funding is not the only thing. There is leadership that really helps to make sure broader programs in government are addressing domestic abuse. Where is the thick thread through all of our children's social care reforms, education, housing? There's so much that the government can do in this strategy. But the elephant in the room is that if we don't fund our specialist services, we're holding ourselves back from that transformational change. And it is a huge problem. Most services, is put in bid after bid. They're forced to do this because of the way funding comes to them, or the opportunities come to them. So instead of supporting the safety of victims, they're spending time putting in bid after bid to keep the lights on. And this is fundamental to our strategy going forward. We must understand that the change kind of rests on this foundation of real stability in this sector.
Why do you think, just briefly, that it is looked at in such a short-term way? Because it's not a problem that's going anywhere.
It is. I mean, I've worked in this area for many, many years. It's true that we had our first refuges 50 years ago. These are independent services, and that's what's so vital to victims and survivors. They want stable, predictable, but independent services. But some of that means they're not sitting in core budgets like we expect of our core budget for schools or social care. But it is still within the ability of government to maintain that independence, but also plan and have a strategy for the funding for these services that is much more comprehensive. I just looked into services for children, for example, children who are victims of domestic abuse. A fourth of the services in this country who offer that kind of service, which by the way is not everywhere, a fourth are having to turn children away. This is pretty serious and fundamental to the strategy of this government, and it's something we need to see. As I said, no government has done this before, but certainly this government, with its ambitions, must do this.
Yeah. Dame Nicole Jacobs, thank you for joining us.
7 minutes to 7 now. It was billed as a historic visit, one on which a deal to end the war in Gaza would finally be agreed. But the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ended his trip to the White House with no sign of that deal. The deal that Donald Trump clearly craves.
There are lane closures ahead.
With Anshul Fefli, Israel correspondent, welcome for Mr. Netanyahu as well. Morning to you, Anshul. There are talks taking place, aren't there? But are we clearer as to why no deal is emerged?
Well, I think that Netanyahu came to Washington looking for something very different from what Donald Trump wanted to emerge from their two meetings in the White House. Netanyahu came with Iran on his agenda. He wanted both to bask together with Donald Trump in the glory of the attacks of 2 weeks ago. He even brought him a piece of an Iranian missile that had fallen in Israel, which had been refashioned as a B-2 bomber, together with a mezuzah, which is many of our listeners will know is a sort of Jewish religious ornament. So that was his main event. He also wanted Trump to give him backing for further strikes on Iran if the Iranians resume their nuclear development. So that was Netanyahu's agenda, whereas Donald Trump wanted very much to be able to announce this week a comprehensive ceasefire agreement in Gaza. That Netanyahu is a lot less eager to give it.
There has been an outline of a deal emerging from those talks in Doha, though. We know the basics of what it would look like, don't we?
And we do. We've known this for months. It isn't new. There are two possibilities: either a comprehensive ceasefire in which all Israeli hostages are released in exchange for Palestinian prisoners, and there are arrangements for the day after governance of Gaza, and of course an Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. And then since Israel's not prepared under Netanyahu to commit to that, even though a majority of Israelis in all the polls want to see such a deal, then the deal on the table is a two-stage deal in which in 60 days half of the hostages are released and Israel withdraws just to parts on the perimeter or the periphery of Gaza, and then during that period a full ceasefire is discussed. But the problem with that deal is that there need to be guarantees that those 60 days indeed do result in a full ceasefire, and some of the conditions that Netanyahu has been putting forward. Hamas aren't accepting of the fact that Israel under Netanyahu won't withdraw from most of Gaza during this 60-day period. The fact that they're still preparing some rather dystopian humanitarian city for most of the Gaza population.
What's fascinating about that, actually, is the opposition to the idea of moving large numbers of Gazans into the south of Gaza, into the core of Gaza. That isn't just opposed by Hamas, of course, they would oppose it, but some in the Israeli Defense Forces are amazingly unhappy with those proposals. You've got a very striking quote about what they're having to do with your piece of the economist, destroying buildings that don't need to be destroyed.
I mean, there is a feeling within the Israeli army, both we know that the chief of staff in the cabinet meeting last week where this plan was put forward was adamantly opposed to it. Obviously, he doesn't get a vote. He's a soldier. Ministers voted in favour, but soldiers on the ground are telling me that there isn't any real military advance, and the legal advisors of the Israeli army are saying this plan is simply a war, and they don't see how it can be carried out under any legal framework. And the whole thing is a start.
Yeah, and Pfeffer there of the Economist, thank you.
Catch the summer of cricket on BBC Sounds.
That's shot, that's a massive blow.
Unbelievable! With commentary on 5 Sports Extra.
Advances and takes the catch. Nina punches the air.
Reactions from the Test Match Special Podcast.
They have some spirit. They've had a tremendous day's play.
And the funny side with Greg James, Felix White and Jimmy Anderson on Tailenders.
Jimmy, are you having a blast on the blast? We're having a blast watching the blast.
It's been a blast,
Listen on BBC Sounds.
Time for weather. Sunday.
Hello Nick, good morning everybody. Yeah, it's going to be another very hot day across many parts of the United Kingdom. Today for South West England, Wales and North West England, we still have a few misty fog patches around Wales, particularly around the Irish Sea coast. That's going to clear away, and then otherwise just lots of sunshine for today, although just a bit of cloud develops in the west country this afternoon. Maximum temperatures widely 27 to 30 degrees, perhaps even 32, 33 Celsius in South East Wales. It could well be the best day of the year so far for Wales today. For South East England, the Midlands, Eastern and North East England, like that already, lots of sunshine, a bit of cloud again building up around the Thames Valley this afternoon. Highs of 27 to 30 degrees, up to 33 Celsius around the South Midlands towards the Surrey areas. That zone perhaps the warmest, hottest place today. Now for Northern Ireland and Scotland, much sunnier and much warmer than it was yesterday. We see temperatures of 20 to 21 degrees in the northern and western Isles, but then widely temperatures about 23 to 27 degrees Celsius. Now for tonight it's going to be another warm and fairly comfortable night, temperatures down to 13 to 18 degrees. Later in the night, low cloud and sea fog will come in across the east of England and eastern Scotland, so in the North Sea. Now on Saturday, that sea fog will linger on some of those eastern coasts into the afternoon. Otherwise, though, it's going to be another sunny day for all of the UK, and temperatures just as high. We can see them up to 31 degrees in Scotland, potentially the warmest day of the year so far here. We get widely high 20s to low 30s elsewhere.
Thank you, Simon. You're listening to Today on Radio 4 with Nick Robinson and Anna Foster. Good morning, it's 7 o'clock on Friday the 11th. The headlines: a migrant returns back. France has been welcomed by some. Questions remain about whether it will reduce small border crossings, both from the Border Force Union and from the specialist barrister on human trafficking, about how easy it is to work illegally in the UK, all those pull factors that President Macron mentioned. And talks between President Trump and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have ended without a Gaza ceasefire deal. But the Israeli Prime Minister listened to the Wall Street.
Also coming up in the next hour, GPs have been told to sign fewer sick notes and send more people to a job coach on the GP. And in 30 years since Trainspotting was published, Irving Marsh has written the sequel. It comes with a disco too.
Questions have been raised about whether the
concerns about a surge in the complication rate, Nuffield Health launched an independent investigation. The company said the inquiry found that Mr. Lamar's conduct did not meet the standards of medical practice they expected to be banned him from working in normal hospitals. Mr. Lamar's health service employer at University Hospital Sussex NHS Trust continues to stand by him. It said that it audited Mr. Lamar's NHS data and showed his outcomes were within the expected national range. Mark Lamar did not respond to a request for comment from BBC News.
In the past few minutes, figures from the Office for National Statistics have shown the UK's GDP fell by 0.1% from May, and is largely predicted to rise at tonight from 8%. The UK's largest airport, Heathrow, has signalled that it wants to increase the fees it charges airlines. Its long-term plan suggested putting up landing fees by an average of 17%. British Airways has called the proposed rise excessive. Virgin Atlantic says it is consumers who ultimately pay the bill. Transport correspondent Ben King.
Every 5 years, Heathrow submits a new plan to manage and develop the airport for approval by regulators and airlines. In its latest scheme, covering the period from 2027 to 2031, it says it wants to increase passenger numbers by 10 million a year and to improve reliability and punctuality. It says it will invest an extra £10 billion in the period, which will partly be covered by increasing airport charges to an average of more than £33 per passenger. IAG, the Jones British Airways, and is the largest user of Heathrow, welcomed the attempt to improve passenger experience. It said the plans required significant revision. It said Heathrow Airport was the most expensive in the world. Heathrow says the charges are in line with comparable airports when the higher costs of operating in Britain are taken into account.
The first hose-pipe ban of the year is now in force. It affects 5 million customers of Yorkshire Water and the county itself, as well as parts of North Lincolnshire and Derbyshire. Anyone breaking the rules could face a fine of up to £1,000. The Environment Agency says England has had the driest start to the year since 1976. Here's Marie Smith.
Sunshine in July isn't much of a surprise, but when it comes after the warmest June on record in England and what the Environment Agency say has been the driest spring for 132 years, the impact can be felt. From today, activities such as watering plants or filling paddling pools are no longer allowed if you're a customer of Yorkshire Water. Elsewhere, Thames Water has warned its 16 million customers across London and the Thames Valley that they could also face a hosepipe ban. Reservoir levels fell at nearly 3/4 of sites across England during June and are below average in all regions.
The body of a teenage couple discovered on the lake at a nature reserve in Birmingham. Police say specialist teams carried out an extensive search after the boy went missing in the water at southbound. A cedar climbed by the Beatles, a note inspired Virginia Woolf, and a lion representing peace in Northern Ireland. They were shortlisted for Tree of the Year 2025. Voting opens today for Woodland Trust's annual competition, which aims to celebrate rare ancient woodland trees across the country. Rebecca Drown reports.
The 10 trees that made this year's shortlist are chosen for showing how trees become ingrained in our cultural landscape. Each has inspired a piece of literature, music or film, or in the case of Tree of Peace and Unity near Belfast, politics. Lime formed of 2 trees that grew together into a single trunk, became a symbol of reconciliation ahead of the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. Other shortlisted trees include the Marrodale yews in Cumbria, immortalised by William Wordsworth, the King of Limbs in Wiltshire, an ancient oak that inspired the band Radiohead, and the cedar tree in Chiswick, London, which the Beatles perched for a music video. The winner, announced at the end of September, will represent the UK in the European Tree of the Year finals.
Blades at the window on the roof of the Moulin Rouge in Paris are turning once again 14 months after they unexpectedly collapsed. Hundreds of people came out to watch the operation of the new replacement aluminium blades. Dancers from the Moulin Rouge performed the club's famous Can-Can on the streets outside. Fireworks soared up into the sky. Thank you, Jane. It is 9 minutes past 7. The one-in, one-out immigration deal between the UK and France, the Prime Minister was so keen to achieve during President Macron's 3-day state visit, was finally announced as a visitor to France yesterday afternoon. It followed more than predicted here on
and that people will continue to make a dangerous journey across the Channel at scale. We will hear from both the Home Secretary of Cuba and her shadow, Chris Ford, at 8 o'clock this morning. What about the UK Border Force staff, who will be, in some cases, tasked with actually making this happen? Lucy Morton is the Immigration Services Union's professional officer. Good morning. What are the concerns of you and of them about how this might or might not work?
Much of this is in the detail. You've got the logistics of how we identify who's going to be returned. We're only talking about 50 people a week at the moment, on average. I think it's pretty statistic, but on average you get about 800 a week. So we're going to have to form a pool of selection. Is it going to be just the first 50 who arrive, in which we can just push the boat later in any given week? I'm going to detain them. If we're not going to detain them, if we release them, don't think we're just going to lose them. They're not going to stay still and wait to be removed. Are they going to be passive in this removal, or are we going to be required to support somebody who doesn't wish to be removed? Are we going to fly them? Are we going to put them on a ferry? And so now, 50 out of an average on a week, that's really not much of a deterrent. What will the French do with them when they get them back? Will they just let them go back into the pool of migrants to try it again? In which case, what you do really is put money in the hands of people from them. And so, without details, it's really difficult to tell how this is going to work.
The suggestion is that it could start within weeks. So how long would your members need to actually get this up and running?
As long as we know what it is that they're being asked to do, and as long as the removal method is in place, then it can be done within hours. If it's a matter of identifying that individual standing there and put them on that ferry or that plane, then it can be done easily. The issue is going to be around how do you identify that individual and any legal challenge flows from that. And it's entirely possible that they commit a fraud takes a week, but the legal challenge is right for it to take years.
So that essentially what you're saying that at the heart of all of this is, has that detail been worked out and negotiated? We just haven't been told it yet, or is that still to come? In which case this could take a lot longer than is being suggested.
Absolutely, the principle makes sense, and I get the idea that it's a start. We've not been able to get French to accept some of that since Brexit. So this is, from that perspective, yes, it's a really good start, but it's only scratching the surface there in a look at the surface. We need to be able to go a lot further as it's going to do anything other than send people money into criminal gangs.
Lucy Morton, the Immigration Services Professional Officer.
Coming up to 13 minutes past 7 now, when solutions to the small boats crisis are debated here in Britain, as we've just been hearing, it's usually returns or to deter people making the journey in the first place. In France, though, the focus is usually on why Britain is such an attractive destination for those who want to find work in the black economy, with the allegation that Britain is a kind of El Dorado, a place that is deeply attractive to people who think they can easily get jobs here without being detected by the authorities and have the right papers. Someone who studies this is Caroline Hoy-Casey, criminal barrister specialising in human trafficking and in organised crime, and she joins us now. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
When you have studied this, has it got easier to get a job here in the UK in the black economy, despite the fact the French have been raising this problem for several decades?
I think there is always a need for manual labour, if I can put it that way, or people prepared to work in jobs that are paid the minimum wage, but perhaps are not regular committed hours or at inconvenient hours, or don't require a high level of skill. There's always been an enormous marketplace in the UK for that. For example, food delivery drivers, food processing, the hospitality sector, manufacturing processes that are labour intensive. And as a result, there is often what I would describe as a grey economy or a gig economy that seems to have grown, in my observations from the perspective of my practice, really since COVID. It's become so much more obvious, if I can put it that way.
that demand is there, and that migrants who've just arrived, sometimes illegally, are the way of solving that crisis for employers.
Yes, people need people, employers need employees to work immediately, and often this is resourced out to, for example, employment agencies and companies, and we've seen this for decades. Companies resource out to employment agencies who perhaps are less than scrupulous, and I'm making clear, I'm not saying all employment agencies, but certainly we've had cases where there have been less scrupulous employment agencies who provide staff at short notice for a day, 2 days, a week, a month, or as and when is needed.
And in France, they would say, well, look, we have the same demands from our businesses, but we are more robust about identity checks, the right checks, ID cards, I'm sorry, and there are also regular checks of employers to make sure they're not employing people who shouldn't be. Is it so very different here?
Well, you've raised the very point that I would turn to, which is I believe that we are one of the only jurisdictions in the European geographical area that does not require identity cards. And if you want to go for a job in the gig economy or in the grey economy, however you want to describe it, sometimes all you need to do is turn up, give a phone number and a bank account so that you can be paid. Sometimes that's not even required. Turn up and do the work. And if it's only for 2 or 3 days or a week, by the time the proper checks would be put in place, so ID card provided, or forgive me, for example, a BRP shows your ability to work in the UK, or your passport, driving license, or even bank card is required in order to get you properly registered. You've done the job and you've moved on.
BRP is a biometric residence, but it's a sort of digital ID card, isn't it, for migrants, which is not required by everybody in the country. Caroline Hoy, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
It is 17 minutes past 7. If you have been following with interest the speculation about whether or not the Chancellor Rachel Reeves will change the ISA rules for cash savings, we have news. Lisa's back with more.
Yes, I am. The BBC now understands the Chancellor has ruled out making changes in her Mansion House speech next week. Let's talk to our business editor, Simon Jack. Simon, morning.
Morning, Fliss.
There had been a lot of speculation, hadn't there? But the government hadn't actually set out plans to reform tax-free accounts. Why might the Chancellor have wanted to make changes?
Well, reforming cash ISAs was set to be, as recently as Wednesday, when I was talking to Treasury officials, the centrepiece announcement at the Mansion House speech on Tuesday next week. That's the Chancellor's key address to the city, and the proposal was that £20,000 a year into cash with any interest earned tax-free. They were going to cut that £300 billion worth of these cash ISAs, and the Treasury plan was to cut that allowance and prod savers into investing more in shares, using that tax-free allowance to put more money into shares, money invested into companies. Over the long term, you get better returns, and you win for the Treasury. But there was a very fierce backlash from building societies and banks who say, as you well know, with your money box hat on, this is one of the few products that people understand. They say it promotes a culture of saving, it gives people greater financial resilience, and crucially that £300 million doesn't just sit there gathering dust in an account, it gets lent back out in the form of loans and mortgages. So the building society said cutting them might reduce the amount available to do that and possibly push up mortgage rates. And also they say, look, the profile of your average cash ISA saver, pretty prudent, pretty risk averse, would they be that likely to say, okay, I'll take my chances in the stock market? So not exactly a U-turn, but a very significant application of brakes. So they haven't abandoned these plans. Instead, the Chancellor will talk about giving people more information to get them more comfortable about investing in shares, not abandoned, as I say, but further consulting on how best to do that. So some furious rewriting of the Chancellor's speech going on today.
And in the short term then, could this be a blow for her plans to, as you say, boost investment, get some of that 300 billion quid held in cash into investments?
Yeah, well, the city were very receptive to this, and I was talking to the boss of the CBI on Tuesday night, Rupert Soames, and he said the UK is unique in providing tax breaks for people to park their money in cash, which is probably, in economic terms, not the most productive way of doing that. So she's got a problem. How can she get not just savers to take more risk, but how to get pension funds and insurance companies to invest more in the UK stock market, because as you know, we've seen quite a lot of high-profile departures, a lot of them gone private. It's harder to invest in UK companies now. She's trying to amalgamate lots of local government pension funds into sort of super funds and promote their ability to do that, because only 4% of UK pension money goes into UK equities. It was about 40% 20 years ago. So she's got a problem. She also thought she might make a bit of extra tax on this. So once again, proposals that she's put forward, like I said, not a U-turn, but a very significant application of the brakes.
Simon Jack, thank you very much. And some other breaking news just in the last few minutes. GDP fell by 0.1% in May, but if you look at the 3 months to May, it still overall grew by 0.5%.
Bliss,
thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry.
There's enthusiasm for both of us there.
Falling over each other to say thank you to Bliss. It is 7:20 now. The first hosepipe ban in the country comes into force today. Customers of Yorkshire Water, which covers areas beyond Yorkshire itself, face fines of up to £1,000 if they use a hosepipe to wash the car, fill a paddling pool, or water their garden. So how are those? Do you have to care about the gardens? Care about their gardens? How are they keeping them alive when they can't use the hosepipes? We can talk to Scott Jameson, head gardener at Wentworth Woodhouse near Rotherham, one of the grandest stately homes in the country, which is staging the RHS Flower Show next week, and also to Ian Bolland, who's conserving his own water to look after his garden in Eckington, south of Sheffield. Morning to you both.
Morning. Morning.
Let's begin with what the weather's like in Rotherham, Scott. Is it, how hot is it there?
Yeah, yesterday was 29 degrees, and today it looks like it's shaping up for the same. Crystal clear blue skies this morning again.
So less Yorkshire, more California.
Yeah, it seems like that. A few palm trees will be next.
And given that you're preparing for the flower show next week, are you already seeing it?
Yes, it's developing day by day, round and about us, so every day gets busier and busier.
Yeah, but do you see it also in, the lawn going yellow and plants struggling a bit?
Less plants struggling. I think yellow is the new green for lawns this year, which isn't overly worrying. Lawns tend to bounce back rather quickly. Trees, what we do at Wentworth, we mulch quite heavily. We use hop and leaves.
Plastic tanks, you see them on farmland, or you see them using plastic tanks, you see them on farmland, or you see them using them. They hold 1,000 litres, and I have one of those installed in my garage at home, and so that fills up year round, or fills and empties year round. It's always working. I use it in winter as much as I use it in summer, primarily for gardening in the summer, but also for washing my car, anything that needs to be spray washed or power washed.
This is United Kingdom, UK,
it's
London.
also connected to an outside toilet that we use, so we're flushing with that. So we're pretty used to using and harvesting rainwater and have been for a long time.
Lots of people will be familiar with having a water break in bottom of the garden centre, aren't you? The sort of garden Eden, but you'll sound like on a much, much bigger scale.
It sounds it. 1,000 litres is a lot, but you do get through it, certainly this time of year. And I've got to say, I've not seen my large tank this low in a long, long time.
Are your neighbours looking wistfully at your water supply, thinking, we've got a bit of that?
Yeah, they can't see over my gate.
You're not supplying them then? You're not saying, please bring your car around, I'll happily wash it for you?
I think I would rather people, if they wanted it, they came and asked me and they could use it rather than running the risk of breaking the law or getting into trouble.
Yeah, well, clearly the answer is to have your own water. But Scott, just a last bit of advice from you to gardeners in other parts of the country as well, who may be thinking, well, this is coming for us. What preparations would you advise?
I think possibly long term is look at what you actually plant in your garden. Do a bit of smart planting if the weather's going to continue like this. And again, heavily mulch things and just harvest as much water as you can from roots. Even baths and tap water when you're washing up. They're all good things to put on your plant.
Scott, thank you very much indeed for that advice. And yes, you can still get tickets, I assume, for the RHS Flower Show at Wentworth Woodhouse near Rotherham next week. And Ian Volland, thank you as well.
It's 7:25. Jonathan's back with the sport.
Morning again. About India's cricketers wish they could stem the flow of runs scored yesterday by a Yorkshire cricketer. Joe Root finished 99 not out as England closed on 251 for 4 on the first day of the third test against India at Lords. Will captain Ben Stokes be fit to resume his innings? Test match special from 10 will have all the answers. Strauss as well in an hour from Lord's. Meanwhile, at Wimbledon, it's men's semi-finals day. 52 years ago featured Britain's Roger Taylor at a time when tennis looked to be tearing itself apart. 81 of the world's top players boycotted the tournament in a dispute. Taylor chose to defy that boycott despite receiving threats from friends and colleagues, as he explains in a new book, The Man Who Saved Wimbledon. But his semi-final against Jan Kodesh didn't end well, as he told me when we met at the All England Club yesterday.
Who was going to stand up for Wimbledon, for Great Britain, for British tennis? So I was number one in Britain, member of the club. Obviously I wanted to support my country. And don't forget the House of Commons and House of Lords were all involved. We had letters from the LTA, don't ignore British justice and that kind of thing. But I just thought, this is it, I'm going to play.
And then you got to the semi-final. Take us there. There you were, Britain's number one, in a very disputed tournament, and you were on the cusp of surely your crowning glory to reach a final and hopefully win. What happened?
Yeah, that was amazing because I had to try to hold myself together all the way through the tournament from the beginning, because I'm saying to myself, well, it's okay to support the tournament, but what if I lose in the first round? You know, your negative thoughts are coming in, and then lo and behold, I'm in the semi-finals and I'm almost going to win this thing. We came off court with 5-4, I'm leading, it was dark, it was damp, there were no lights, there was no roof. 42 minutes later, when they finally called us to put us on, I'd already decided they weren't going to do that, and we'd play tomorrow. And that was the problem. I started to wind down, off we went again. You didn't think of saying, no, I'm not going to go. You just didn't have that support. You didn't have an agent, you didn't have even a friend, a wife, anybody in the changing room.
Oh, you can almost hear the dampness of feeling amongst the crowd now. Suffering. They've waited for this. Such a great match, and here is their hero going out.
And out you went, and in 8 minutes it was gone. You won 3 games, and that was it.
That was it, yeah, and I'd lost the focus of concentration.
Can Taylor still to the forehand, return cross court and out. It's all over.
Wimbledon didn't have the same feel for me then after that.
You talk about how no one came to see you, whereas nowadays, lots of people would be there. There'd be family, friends, coaches and so on. Thinking of another British left-hander, someone like Jack Draper, what similarities do you see? Model good looks? What future do you see for him? Is he ever going to get as high as Sinner and Alcaraz? Has he got that talent?
Yes, I think he has got the talent. We don't know enough about his character, and that's what's going to pull him through. He obviously tries hard, his match is a good competitor, but the fight experience, the hanging on to play these long matches, and he seems very dedicated and wants to do it.
What about these semi-finals then? Sinner versus Djokovic. Let's take that one first. How would you see coming through there?
Sinner is one of the rising stars. They've already beaten him, I think, on the way through, so they're not afraid. Djokovic, again, I just seeing him, fantastic player. Perhaps if he could start a bit quicker. He plays on the baseline that first set and lets everybody play themselves in, and then he starts playing. I think Djokovic has got a good chance. He looks good, he's fit. With a record like that, he believes he can win.
Which, as you just said, mindset is key. And then we come to Alcaraz, the defending champion, who just never stops winning at the moment. This extraordinary run since April, up against the American Taylor Fritz. What do you reckon there? Can anyone really stop Alcaraz?
Taylor Fritz is very good. He's done very well this year. He's number one in America. He's got a good serve, so he can. But Alcaraz, you know, those players come along like that. It doesn't matter what people tell you. They don't have any weaknesses. How are you going to win? Sinner might match him, we don't know. He's going along strongly. They have a rivalry, aren't they, at the moment?
One other key question. Say Yannick Sinner or Carlos Alcaraz. Have they got what it takes to be a James Bond like you auditioned for? Hey, have they got it to be 007?
Not with the red hair, no. Sinner, he's not going to make it. But I think Carlos could. He could make it. And they've got to practice. Hello, my name is James Bond.
Roger Taylor, very good. You should have got the part, I told you. But anyway, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you. Great. Thank you, Jonathan.
How many people get an audition to be James Bond and then don't turn up for the second audition?
Yeah, why? Did he tell you?
Yes, his wife said that's not what you need to be doing.
I love
so quite rightly. As a man who did things very much by his own book, he never had a coach, he started late and so on. And then he actually met, in the book, it's great, he was in a bar in California and who was sitting next to him, a bit worse for wear? George Lazenby, the man who got the job instead of Roger.
Instead of him.
There you go.
I love the idea of him.
Roger Taylor, the man who saved Wimbledon with Marcus Buckman. Great read, very good.
I love the idea of her saying, you know, come on, love, you don't need
It is a wife's job to crush dreams and bring everybody right back down to earth.
Now about those shirt up with his chest hair.
People watching, they're only listening to us. But thank you. Now, let's move on to this London Radio 4 where Adam Fleming brings us the topics sparking debate across social media.
Antisocial on BBC Radio 4.
The Supreme Court has said that for the purposes of our equality law, sex means biological sex.
Each week, I take a subject which is causing a stir online and try to find some clarity.
There isn't a list of disabilities. If you struggle to leave the house, that will affect your mobility.
The new series of Antisocial with me, Adam Fleming.
When you think about it logically, a Sikh man wearing a turban on the bus, does that affect the average white working class person in Wolverhampton? I don't think so.
Starts today, midday, on Radio 4 and BBC Sounds.
There will be a little bit of mist and fog, slow to clear from a few coasts around the Irish Sea this morning, but otherwise, you know the weather story for today. It is going to be hot and humid once again.
Coming up after the news, should GPs be giving out fewer sick notes and helping instead get their patients back to work? And before the news at 8, what hopes now for a ceasefire after Israel's Prime Minister returned from the US, apparently empty-handed?
You're listening to Today on Radio 4 with Nick Robinson and Anna Foster, and Jane Steele has a summary of the news.
Figures which have just been published show the UK economy shrank by 0.1% in May. Analysts have been expecting a rise in GDP, which measures the value of all goods and services produced in the UK. The Office for National Statistics said a fall in production output was driven by weaknesses in oil and gas extraction, car manufacturing, and what it called the often erratic pharmaceutical industry. Opposition parties have questioned whether the government's deal with France to send some migrants back across the Channel, the UK, will deter others from making the crossing. Sir Keir Starmer says the deal isn't a silver bullet, but a pilot to prove the concept. President Trump says he's imposing a 35% tariff on goods imported to the US from Canada from next month. He made the announcement in a letter posted to social media and addressed to the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. Talks between President Trump and the Israeli Prime Minister have ended without a Gaza ceasefire deal. Benjamin Netanyahu has hinted one could be on the way. Efforts to reach a truce and the return of Israeli hostages have dominated the discussions in Washington. BBC News has learned that a surgeon banned from a private healthcare company is still working for the NHS. Nuffield Health said that Mark Lamar was stopped from working for them after concerns about his surgical complication rates. But he continues to work as a colorectal surgeon at the Royal Sussex County Hospital in Brighton, which has stood by him. Mr. Lamar didn't respond to a request for comment. A hosepipe ban is now in force across Yorkshire and parts of North Lincolnshire and Derbyshire. Yorkshire Water customers who break the rules could be fined up to £1,000. Parisians have been celebrating the return of the moving blades on the top of the Moulin
Thank you guys
Rouge
for watching.
after they
Please don't
collapsed
forget to
40
like and
months ago.
subscribe.
Dancers performed the French nightclub's
I'll
famous
do another
Can-Can
live
street
tonight
outside,
on my way
and
home.
fireworks
Thank you.
lit up the sky.
Around 8
Jane,
p.m.
thank you very much indeed. It's coming up